The book is dedicated to my grandmother, Catherine, and it was inspired by my grandmother's story. When she passed away in 2001, she left behind 40 years worth of her journals, which we didn't know that she had kept. And as you'll find out, if you haven't read the book, that early on in the story, you find out that the parents in the story pass away when the girls, Millie and Twist, the sisters, are 14 and 16. And in real life, my grandmother and her sister Virginia lost their parents when they were 16 and 17. And I think because of that and some dark family secrets, which I will not tell you so that it doesn't ruin the book for you, they were sort of torn between feeling like they were the best parents ever because they had to be the best parents ever, because I think, the teenage years, I know I wasn't probably the perfect teenager growing up, and I think they lost them at an age where, you didn't have time to work out your feelings about who your parents were. You didn't get to know them as people, you just know them as your parents, who are the ones who are supposed to take care of you. It was a way to work out whether or not, how she felt about them and how she didn't feel about them. And so they were also sort of melancholy journals. So people ask me all the time, how much was I able to take from the journals? Nothing, no sentences at all, just sort of her feeling of, this is an important story and I keep trying to tell it to myself in my journals. And to me, I think it's interesting because I think she was always trying to find a way to honor her parents. And I did the exact same thing, trying to find a way to honor her. So hopefully dedicating the book to her breathed some life into, 16 is a pretty early age, I think, even back then, to go off and be alone in the world, go work, get an apartment, start your own family at 18. I think that, they both moved into their new lives really quickly, and so this is something, their old life, their childhood haunted them in a lot of ways. So the Bird sisters are sort of imagining what would have happened if they had stayed together. And so in the book, we start, the opening of the novel is them as older women in their 70s living together in the house they grew up in Spring Green, Wisconsin, which is actually where I'm from. It's a real town, which I thought the publisher would make me change for sure. But they said, no, we love the name Spring Green, so we're keeping it. So I was real nervous about going to Spring Green to do some events because I thought, oh God, they're going to say, this is not right at all. But luckily, they were very gracious to me there. But I think sometimes you wonder, no, that street was not correct in 1947, and there's someone in town who still knows all of this stuff, so that was pretty funny. So I'm going to read a little bit of the opening just to give you a sense of where the sisters are starting off from, and then I'm going to read a little section from when they're young, because I think you need to know there, when you're buying the book, that there are two sections of the novel. One in the present day when the sisters are older, living together, and one in the past when sort of the summer that their cousin Bet comes down to visit, and all these things start to change when they're 14 and 16. But I'll lead you through that when we get there. But a lot of people who don't know about the girls being older in the book are really surprised and why are we reading about this? So I like to tell people up front, you're going to get some of that. So this is chapter 1. Used to be when a bird flew into a window, Millie and Twist got a visit. Millie would put a kettle on and set out whatever culinary adventure she'd gone on that day. For morning arrivals, she offered her famous vanilla drop biscuits and raspberry jam. Twist would get the medicine bag from the hall closet and sterilize the tools she needed, depending on the seriousness of the injury. A wounded limb was one thing, a wounded crop was another. People used to come from as far away as Reedsburg and Wilton. Millie would sit with them while Twist patched up the poor old robin or the sweet little meadowlark. Over the years, the number of visitors had dwindled. Now that the grocery store sold ready-baked biscuits and jelly in all colors of the rainbow, people didn't bother as much about birds. On a particularly low morning, while the two sisters were having tea and going over their chore lists, Millie pulled back the curtains when she heard an engine straining on one of the nearby hillsides. When all she saw was the empty gravel drive, the hawkweed poking up along the edges, she let go of them. We should be glad, she said. Maybe the birds are getting smarter. Twist brought the breakfast dishes to the sink. They were down to toast and butter now, sometimes a hard-boiled egg from the night before. How can you stand to be so positive? "We're old," Millie said. "What else can we do?" But even she missed the sound of strangers in the house, the way the pine floors creaked under new weight. Had it really been a month since a person other than Twist had spoken to her? Time had a funny way of moving when you didn't want it to, and standing still when you did. Millie didn't bother to wind the cuckoo clock above the sink anymore. There was something sadistic about the way it popped out of its miniature door so cheerfully every quarter hour. But the visitors, though she and Twist had devoted their lives to saving birds, not wishing for them to be injured, the last few years Millie had perked up whenever a car turned into their driveway instead of continuing up the road. They'd spread out their laminated touring maps with expressions of shame because just in case, the words they'd used to justify buying the maps in the first place meant they were lost, and there were no noble ways to say that. The men would look up at the sky, trying one last time to discern east from west, and the women would look down at the ground because their husbands had failed to understand a simple map. Millie would put the couples at ease by admitting that she missed a turn every once in a while, even though there wasn't one to miss. She'd point to the blank space between the hills and the river. This is where you are. So what happens in the first chapter a little bit is that a woman who has 3 children, and I think, most people who've had children or know of someone who has children know that, dropping them off at school is a busy time and everybody's trying to get their stuff ready, and this woman's shuffling her kids into the minivan, and somewhere along the way to school she runs over a goldfinch. And the daughter, who's a little girl of 6, starts to cry and cry and cry, "Oh my God, mommy, mommy." And so I think more out of frustration at her daughter's crying, she takes this little bird and the kids to the bird sisters, the ladies who rescue birds, to see if it can be fixed. And I think it's more just to quiet this child that is driving her crazy, probably. And I happen to be a bird lover, and I happen to think if I run over something, I'll get up and try and fix it. But I understand where she's coming from, too. I mean, it's a lot to take care of that many kids. And so they end up, the sisters end up taking the bird in, and they know right away that they will not be able to save it, but they go through the motions of trying to anyways. And part of that, their ritual is, Twist is the one who tries to save the birds, and she kind of works in a rudimentary way. She takes balsa wood from an old model airplane up in the attic to try to, mend wings and things like that. They're not quite like veterinarians, So she works with them, and then Millie takes the mothers, usually it's women, who come to the kitchen and offers them the biscuits and the jam. And she gets to talking on this day, and on this day, unfortunately, Millie is sort of feeling nostalgic and contemplative, and somehow, somewhere beyond her even, they're talking about faith in God, and she's talking about Father Rice, who we'll see later on when I read, and she ends up kind of likening her belief in God and how that changed to learning that Santa Claus may not be real. And of course, the daughter's right there and hears this, and the mother is like, sweeps up her kids and is, "Oh, I can't believe you said that. You just made my day 10 times harder," kind of thing. But after that, she also says something, a little more serious, and she says, "Only a person without children would say something like that." And Millie is the sweetest, nicest person ever, and I think she always pretty much has great intentions. So she didn't mean that, but it's like the worst thing you could possibly say to her because she wanted children so much, and she didn't have them, and you know that very early on, and so it's a very stinging thing to say. Whereas, if you said it to Twist, she'd be like, "So what? Kids are disgusting anyways. I didn't want them," But for Millie, it touches a chord with her, and it sets off on this particular day her thinking back into the past, the way, the moment sort of her life went one way when it could have gone the other, and the traditional route of family, kids, and what happened in that junction, which is that one summer I was telling you about. So the next part I'm just going to read is her kind of going, you'll see her going back in the past, and then what she ends up doing is you'll see that when the girls turn younger, they're in church, Lily Chapel, and you'll notice pretty quickly when they're younger, hopefully. It shouldn't be a big transition.